Hey everyone, welcome back to another Distillations by Brian Luxinger. Today we are returning to John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Very happy to be back to this one, and I think without further ado, let's just dive into it. Continuous Cosmos and Modern World Grammar, Episode 3. Sounds promising.
So this leads to some fundamental changes. People start to become more aware of their responsibility for the violence and the chaos and the suffering in their own lives. And they start to become aware of how much the transformation of mind, or mind and heart, because in the Axial Age, these terms are often referred to in a singular manner.
That's cool. I didn't know that. Mind and heart in the Axial Age referred to in a singular manner. Heart and mind, you're changing hearts and minds, I guess, is a saying that may have survived from then. But yeah, I think nowadays we separate them. The heart is talking about love and romance and that sort of subject matters, and then the mind is got all sorts of associations. Maybe I've got too much of a philosophy of mind background to think of things coming to mind. Yeah, mind, brain, very separate, maybe more logical, reasonable reasoning sort of stuff going on, and the heart feels and is doing other kinds of loving and feeling and hurting of the heart and sadness and all the emotional qualities. So that's interesting that they were combined in the Axial Age, if that's what he's saying.
How much transformation in the mind and heart is the way to alleviate suffering. So what starts to happen is the mythological framework and the way people are framing themselves and their world changes. Now let me explain to you how I'm using this word myth, because I'm not using it the way we standardly use it.
Okay, so it's going to be a non-standard use of the word myth. And mythology, the first thing that comes to mind is that J.R.R. Tolkien was filling in some period of English history that didn't have any myth associated with it. It was just like this missing history. And so he wanted to fill it in with his own myth that he was writing in the 20th century, 19th, 20th century. So anyway, that's one thing that comes to mind when it has to do with myth is The Lord of the Rings, which is a little bit of an obsession of mine.
See, myths aren't false stories about the ancient past. They're symbolic stories about perennial patterns that are always with us. That's a very different thing. So in the Bronze Age world, before the Axial Revolution, people experienced the world in what's been called by Charles Taylor like the continuous cosmos. Well, I have a few questions about the use of the word cosmos, but we'll come back to that later. The idea here is human beings experience themselves in radical continuity, that sense of connectedness, right, that you see even back in the shamanic world.
Well, connectedness or continuity? Continuity would be a thing never ending, right? Just a continuous, without end, infinite, non discrete. And I suppose you could say that there's continuity in there, but it's sort of like in order for things to be connected, they first have to be discrete to then have relations to one another or to be connected to one another in some way. So continuous to me doesn't quite fit connected. Well, yeah, I guess if everything is connected, then it is continuous in a sense because there's no, if everything's connected and there's no breakage in all the connections, then the whole web could be a continuous web. I guess when I think of continuous, I think of some sort of arrow or a line segment, or but not a segment, just a line, going off into infinity. I'm nitpicking, but trying to engage as we're doing here.
Was very prevalent in the continuous cosmos. In the continuous cosmos, people feel there's a deep connection, a deep continuity between the natural world and the cultural world, and between the cultural world and the world of the gods. The differences between, right, human beings and the gods are differences in power. This is a cosmos that is experienced, where reality is experienced primarily in power, in terms of power. The gods are just more powerful than us, more glorious than us.
So they're kind of just taking one feature of human beings, our capacity for power, and exploding it out to absurd levels and saying, okay, here's this dimension, power, we're going to put all the levels to 100, and then those are gods. So they're just kind of humans, but on 100, 110 for power level. OP. they're OP humans, I guess.
You even see this in the Old Testament, right? Where if you ask people, you can ask people, what term is most often used of God? And people will say, righteous or holy. Well, those are used quite often, but the term that's most used is glorious, shining with power, right? Which it's not a moral term at all. Think of the Greek gods. They're not moral exemplars at all. They're just extremely glorious and extremely powerful. The Egyptian king, the pharaoh, is extremely glorious and extremely powerful. So there's this continuous cosmos. It moves in great cycles, just like the seasons, just like day and night. Time moves in large cycles that repeat through eternity. In fact, what you're often trying to do with your ritual behavior is you're trying to tap into this continuity. You're trying to get back to the original power of creation.
Just a quick note on that. In a way, I try to do the same thing. I try to return to my first ever philosophical thought, which was, if there's a Big Bang, then what was there before the Big Bang? And I know that question is sort of ill-posed. I think scientists or people will respond saying, well, there is no before because then time began. And so, there's no prior, there's no poor. It's before, it's a poor, ill-formed question. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. I guess what I was getting at was just contemplating the nature of absolute nothingness. And I talk about this all the time, and I will continue to, because it's sort of my origin, and it reignites my sense of awe that was the birth of my philosophical interests and aspirations. And so in a way, I'm sort of doing a similar thing, always trying to come back to the birthplace of my philosophical aspirations, nothingness. And in the period kind of right around there was my most mind-blowing period of my life, where everything was changing very radically and I was learning stuff very quickly. And so I have to kind of remember what it felt like to be in that, and not be quite so jaded these days after perhaps a dark night of the soul sort of situation that took, better part, almost a decade. Anyway, I digress.
It's a very different way of relating to the world. So there's this continuity between the natural world, the social world, and the divine world. And time is wrapped on itself in this really important way. When the axial revolution hits, this world is replaced by a different one. Now, again, I'm speaking mythologically here. People will talk about it mythologically, and you have to understand that doesn't mean the way we would think of it as a literal scientific thing, nor is it what we would merely call metaphorical. Mythological is neither scientific nor just metaphorical.
Mythological, not scientific, and not purely metaphorical. Somewhere in between, or a third option. I just want to keep that in mind. Not scientific or literal, but not literally metaphorical. Something else.
Uses a mythology of two worlds. And the idea is, this is the everyday world. This is the world of the untrained mind. This is a world that is beset by self-deception, self-destruction, illusion, violence, chaos. It's a world in which we are out of touch with reality. But opposed to this is the real world. Now, mythologically, you can talk about this as two worlds, but of course, in a lot of the traditions,
That's nice. The real world isn't the suffering, everyday, monotonous world. That's a nice idea. The real world is something else, something different.
real world is just cutting through the illusion of the everyday world. But the idea is the real world is how the trained mind, the wise mind, sees the world. This is how the world looks when you're in touch with reality, when your mind is not beset by illusion and delusion.
Sounds great. That sounds great. And it's sort of like special access through training, through whatever the process of becoming wise is. You get sort of special access to the real world, cutting through that illusion.
Now here, wisdom is power-oriented. To be a wise individual is to learn how to acquire the power that was imbued at creation into the cycles. It's like energy's put into the system and it cycles around, and then energy's put in the system, it cycles around, and you want to tap into that power. Wisdom is how to tap into that power. Because what you're after is like long life, live long and prosper.
It's almost like what he's talking about in the continuous cosmos, maximizing those things, long life and prosperity, is sort of like taking the everyday world of the other two worlds mythology, taking the everyday world and maximizing and creating the best that you can within that everyday world, and then just totally dismissing the real world on top of that. But I don't know, from what he just said, it sounds almost like the sort of stuff that happens in everyday world in the continuous cosmos. It's like we're going to perfect that. We're going to enter into that everyday world, increase the power, increase the prosperity, increase the longevity of a life in the everyday world. I don't know. Could be wrong, but that would seem to apply.
But over here, there's a radical change. Wisdom changes because look, you do not want to fit into this world because this is the world of suffering and violence. It's a world in which you're out of touch with what's real. And as we'll talk about it later, you deeply desire to be in touch with reality. It's one of your most powerful drives. But here, you're defined increasingly more by how you can self-transcend, self-transform, how you can grow as a person. Notice how pervasive this has become in our self-understanding. Notice how we don't like to be with people who aren't growing.
Yeah, I think that's true, that it's pervasive, that definitely the growth, but I don't know if it matches up with what he's describing here. I mean, how many people are obsessed with a totally secular version of personal growth that really doesn't have any kind of depth or height to it, you know, striving to be wise or something like that. Didn't come across my mind for the majority of my life until I confronted people like, you know, reading philosophy or confronting now these thinkers who are kind of out there, like John Vervaeke is. But yeah, this kind of personal growth, I don't know how connected it would be to that, because this seems much more sophisticated, in a spiritually sophisticated than what you would find at, you know, this self-help shelf of a bookstore.
A lot of what you think is natural to you, just part of how your mind works, is actually culturally internalized. It has been generated historically, and you have internalized it culturally, and you think of it just as how your mind works. Think again about literacy. It is hard for you to remember, and I mean to reenact what it was like to not be able to think in, right,
Yeah.
like literate terms,
Yeah.
to imagine words. In a similar way, a lot of these ways of thinking, these psychotechnologies, have become so second nature to us that we forget the historical origin. And that's problematic, because the degree to which we don't have a historical understanding is a degree to which we are going to be ignorant of the historical factors that are driving the meaning crisis. Let me foreshadow that meaning crisis right now. So this is a mere foreshadowing. We're going to come back to it.
Okay.
This is a mythological way of thinking which allows us to articulate
Neither literal nor neither scientific nor metaphorical. Something in between.
and train the psychotechnologies of the axial revolution, these psychotechnologies of self-transcendence, of wisdom and enhanced meaning. But the problem is, this mythology is failing for us now. The scientific worldview is destroying the possibility of this for us. In a way that might seem sort of cosmically ironic, the scientific worldview is returning us to a continuous cosmos.
Yeah. I was just going to say, yeah. Because it's just a smooth matter of degree gradations, smooth gradations from physics, fundamental physics, to chemistry, to life is just more complex combinations of chemistry, and then life is more complex combinations of social animals, and then the brain is a more complex social animal, and it's this, and a brain is just a very complex arrangement of material components. Is this continuity, this just smooth, continuous cosmos. I don't know if it's cyclical, but could be also, that I'm sure there's cyclical, what's that theory of black holes and universes being created, and that it's a whole Darwinian evolutionary competitive thing going on in the multiverse, anyway. Yeah, totally. That I was thinking about, it's kind of going back. It's interesting.
There is no radical difference in kind between you
Right.
and the primates that you evolved from. That,
which is metaphysical. Difference in kind, category of being. There's no difference in category of being between the animal and the human.
there isn't some radical difference in kind between your mind and your embodied existence, right? Science is leveling the world.
Yeah.
We're returning to a one world. For most of us, we can't live this anymore. We still talk this way, but we can't live it. Copernicus and Galileo re-embed us. Darwin re-embeds us. Einstein re-embeds us. We're being re-embedded back into the physical world, but we don't want to lose.
Because that was the disembedding, creating the two worlds of mythology. Now the re-embedding is being flattened.
All that we gained through the great disembedding. How do we reconcile those? How do we live with the legacy of the axial revolution when we can no longer inhabit its worldview? That's part of the problem. That's only part. As I mentioned, some of you have probably read parts of the Bible, or at least heard parts of the Bible, although biblical illiteracy is rising. And that's problematic. Not because I think people should be Christians or Jews. I'm not here to proselytize. But the degree to which you don't have a grasp of the grammar of the Bible is
you're just going to completely be checked out of all sorts of facts about the modern world. I mean, I just feel like I've come to appreciate more and more the fact that we're living in the shadow of Christianity. Louis C.K. has that great bit, where he says, the Christians won. You know how I know? What year is it? It's like year 1 year from Jesus being born, 2 years from Jesus being born, 3. I'm butchering his amazing bit, but yeah, we're just living in the shadow. Our entire structure of time is time since Jesus Christ. If you haven't read the Bible, I'm and I haven't, I really haven't, and it's, I guess, on the list, the giant list of things I have to read one day. Um, but yeah, it's almost like we're kites that are cut from the string. It's like you gotta read the string, figure out what you're tethered to a certain extent. And the Greeks, and Socrates, and reading Plato and all this good stuff.
The degree to which you don't have a grasp of the grammar of your own cognition. And you may say, I'm an atheist. I don't.
It's even more intense. Grammar of cognition. Holy hell. That's crazy.
Care. That's irrelevant. I'm not talking about what you say. I'm talking about how you think. There's a big difference there. Grammar is how you put thoughts together. It's not the vocabulary. It's not what you say. We still talk this way. We still are filled with the God grammar of the Bible. And you say, no, I'm not. Yes, you go to a movie and you watch the person who falls in some way, and then they have an insight and they are redeemed and they find their way back. Maybe it's through Alcoholics Anonymous or they come out of addiction. That's biblical grammar.
Okay.
Okay? Again, what matters here.
Have I been reborn since finding Narcotics Anonymous? Is that my what do they call them? Reborn Christian reborners, rebirthers. How am I blanking on this? Whatever the term is. Born again Christians. Yeah. So getting clean, going to NA or going to AA, getting sober, this is like being born again. I guess yeah, actually, discovering a higher power, even if it is just the meetings and the rooms and the community, the fellowship of whatever 12-step program you're in. I guess finding a higher power in that and allowing that to kind of live in you. Born again. Something they say in the rooms is you only have to change one thing, and that's everything. So I guess it is kind of a radical rebirth.
Here is how it shapes our sense of self and world. I'm not advocating for a particular religion, but of course I am going to talk about the Judeo-Christian heritage precisely because I want to explain to you how these psychotechnologies have become part of the very grammar, not only of your cognition, but of your existential sense of being. Here's the idea. It's a psychotechnology of understanding time as a cosmic narrative, as a story. It's applying something, again, that's universal. All cultures tell stories, and we'll talk about the cognitive science of this later. But you see, this isn't a story. This is a circle. It's a cycle. What kind of structure does a story have? Well, a story has a beginning and has some crucial climax.
It's like a vector. As like a direction. There's a thrust in a certain direction. There's a teleological vector point or something. I don't know.
Turning point. And there's a resolution. There's a direction to it. There's a purpose to it. You get this idea of cosmic history, of using our skills for story to explain how the cosmos is unfolding through time. It's a radical idea.
Story to explain the cosmos evolving through time. Yeah, I mean, I guess if humans were just telling stories to one another and they were about one another, to then apply it to the entire universe. But maybe it's more than that, because it's almost like humans and their minds are this very unique and specific thing in the entire universe. And then Earth, and then life, and then humans, and then human brains, and then human brains telling each other a certain pattern of words that has a kind of shape to it. And then for that very hyper-specific thing going on there, blah, 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 humans telling each other stories. Hey, we're going to take this one very particular part of us being humanness, and we're going to literally use it to describe the entire thing. Whereas maybe before, the entire thing was this cyclical, continuous thing that was maybe more in line with like an analogy of the seasons, of the 4 seasons. And it's sort of like, hey, this thing is a circle, and we're going to take evidence from the natural world, this cyclical, seasonal pattern, and we're going to apply that to the whole thing because that's actually what's going on. And then we come along, humans, I guess in the axial age, have this other way of communicating through story, and we're going to go, oh, hey, actually, let's ignore that evidence and maybe put this other architecture on top of our explanation of how the world works. I'm giving it a sort of pejorative spin, to be fair. Like, I am sort of saying, like, oh, well, I guess I need to hear the explanation for why story and that structure may be a good thing to apply to the entire universe in its entirety. Yeah. All right. So let's see if that explanation is given.
So why is it radical? Well, notice the difference here. This is not an open future, right? You're condemned to repeat. So cultures where cyclical time is still prevalent, Eastern cultures, for example, the repetition of the cycle is onerous. It's horrible. People think reincarnation, for example, within an Indian context is a wonderful, I'll be born again. No, that's horrible. What you're trying to do is get free from those cycles. Because doing this again and again and again and again and again is terrifying.
Nietzsche's flat circle thing. I guess that's where the horror comes from, that idea. To be used then in True Detective, one of the greatest lines in that show.
Moksha, you want freedom. Nirvana, you want cessation. You want release from the cycle because there is no purpose to it. But here, the future's open. Your actions now can change the future.
Okay. Another way of seeing it is that it's just as purposeless. It's just, as opposed to be movement in a circle, it's movement in a straight line. But I guess then you do introduce this kind of resolution, crisis resolution or whatever the interruption is of that straight line, which then gives it more complexity and creativity. But in a way, you could frame it as being equally as boring or terrifying. But the introduction of something radically new definitely is different than a circle where it's always the same. I guess you're heading in a certain direction, and then something new appears in this open future. I mean, I think we're introducing a lot more terms now and complicating the picture, but yeah, I get the appeal there.
If you figure out how to participate, remember that participatory knowing, if you figure out how to participate in the story, your actions can change the future. The God of the Old Testament is the God of the open future. That's why at first he has no name. Because to name something is to locate it, to specify it, to tie it down.
Maybe that's the difference of what I was framing as the boring, just going in a direction. If you have a name to the goal state or to the destination, if you know where you're going, you dropped a pin, now it's just as boring as the circle. But an unnamed, unspecified destination allows the journey to unfold in the way that he's talking about.
For the longest time, this God has no name. And then, when Moses finally challenges it and he reveals his name, he says, it's badly translated in the older versions of the Bible. It's often translated as I am that I am. But it actually in the Hebrew means I will be what I will be. I am the God of the open future. This God is interested in, becomes progressively, now, again, you can't point and say, there's where it changed in the Bible, but you can see there's aspects of a pre-axial God. But as you read through the Old Testament, God becomes more and more axial. He becomes more and more the deity of something that you now take for granted. Progress.
Yeah, okay.
The idea, and right, for us, it's not just an idea, right?
I think I've got a book called The History of the Idea of Progress. I definitely want to read that. Maybe I'll react to some stuff in there. I have a feeling it's going to be really good. But yeah, just this whole idea of progress is a fascinating, and you sort of take it for granted that progress is inherent in morality, that you want to be progressing, and that we should all, as a society, as a race, the human beings should be progressing, the cosmos should be progressing. But I'm not sure where it comes from, where that whole thing gets started, gets kicked off. And okay, yeah, I mean, well, it sounds like it's getting kicked off here with this whole narrative structure being applied to the universe, and probably concept creep it being applied to more and more domains of human inquiry, or whatever it is, or human activity, because progress in the continuous cosmos, and in the cyclical seasonal picture is probably not there. It's no progress until moksha, until you are liberated from the cycle.
It's in the lifeblood. It's in the very bones of your sense of self in your life. Is your life progressing?
Yeah.
Or are you stuck? Is it moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is this idea. History progresses, and it can degenerate, and it can improve. God becomes more and more a representative of that.
Are these videos cyclical? Am I just stuck in a cycle? I'm going to keep posting them, putting them out there, or am I progressing towards something? Do I even want to be putting this stuff out there? Why do I want to be putting it? Do I want followers? Do I want people to see it? Do I want to create a community? Do I want to make a living? What do I have, something else that I want to do? Put an idea out there, and have it be received at some point in the future, and that it's progress towards that, finding the right audience. I mean, all these are progress oriented, progressive ideas of like that I'm doing this thing for a specific reason, and that right now, kind of at the beginning, even though I've been sort of doing it for like 8-9 years, that like I'm stuck, and anyway, I'm identifying with the thought of like, yeah, I'm stuck. I'm on the hamster wheel. I'm spinning my wheels without going anywhere. Going where? Where am I going? Where do I need to be going anywhere? And I think maybe part of the consistency of putting videos out recently is maybe explained by a certain acknowledgement that there is the process itself of me reacting to of engaging with John Vervaeke's work is going to do something inherently, and that whatever happens when it's out there, hitting share at the very end of this process is like not the most important part of it, perhaps the least important part of it, and that the meat of what's happening is right now in this very moment, that I'm getting something from engaging with his work deeply, and that there's something happening in this process itself, and that's where the value is. But but maybe both can coexist, that there could be this immense value in the thing itself, and that I'm also working towards a thing, and progressing towards a thing. Anyway, I feel like I get autobiographical, or like, I talk about what it is I'm doing and blah, blah, blah. I feel like I say that a lot. I don't know why I do. It could be not a good feature of my personality. It could be a defect. In a way, I kind of am fascinated by like the methodology of doing things, like not just the output of a philosopher, but how the philosopher crafted the thing and what their intentions, what they wanted to do and how they did it, and the media, the medium and the craft. I'm kind of interested in all those things. So I guess when I do kind of go meta and start commenting on my own what I'm trying to do, it's because I'm fascinated by that in others, in others' work too. There's a great thing that I shared that maybe I'll do a reaction to. It's about Kierkegaard and Wittgenstein and how they are both very much philosophers who paid close attention to how they were communicating their work, not just, one had pseudonyms, the other were like giant conjecture, refutation, and then sort of saying like, beyond this, nothing can be said or something with Wittgenstein. I have to go back, but anyway, maybe I'll read that one too. That's definitely on the list that eventually I'll read, but it's a fascinating look at their authorship and self-authorship and then how they wanted to be received. All right, that was a long digression. Let's keep going.
Now, there's a course here, and you're participating in it. Now, what do I mean by participating? You don't know it from the outside, just having beliefs about it or just having skills. You know it in this way. You know it by identifying with it. You change it while it's changing you, and you're changing it while it's changing you. You are immersed in it like a stream, like a course of a river. You are participating in it. When you're making love with somebody, you are participating in them. You're identifying with them, empathizing with them, resonating with them. You are changing them as they are changing you. And it rises, forgive me the pun, to a climax, to a turning point, to a resolution. See, in ancient Israel, faith, this term has become useless for us now, but faith didn't mean believing ridiculous things for which there is no evidence. That is a recent idea. That is not what it meant. Faith was your sense.
Yeah, I definitely am familiar with that. Alan Watts has a great quote. Belief, like leaf, is to cling to or wish to be, and to cling, leaf, be leaf, something like that. But faith is about like letting go, like just letting go, letting something out of your grasp. I have to bring that up to get the specifics, but something like that, basically.
Faith was your sense that you're in this reciprocal realization. You're in course. You're on course. You're involved and evolving with things. It's your sense, I'm on course. Or even your sense, this is the turning point, and I know what to do. I know who I need to change into. I knew how to turn myself and things. You can get it wrong. You can think you're on course when you're actually dramatically off course. You're trespassing, to use older biblical language. You're walking off the path. You're no longer on course. That's the basis of a word that we can't use anymore again because of our biblical literacy and the fact that we've lost touch with this sense of knowing. In fact, this word, many people treat this word almost like a comical word. Sin.
Yeah.
Sinning isn't just doing something very immoral, right? In the New Testament, the word that translates this is when you're shooting a bow and arrow. So if you've done archery, you can't shoot for where your eye tells you to look because you'll actually miss the bullseye. You have to have a kind of faith to sense, right, where you need to actually shoot so you don't miss the mark. So the idea here is I'm trying to sense the course of things. And if I'm...
Oh, that's cool. So I had heard the missing the mark and archery, but I don't think I've heard someone talk about the way archers sense, and that just going for the bullseye ends up not making you off target. That's very cool. If there's an analogy metaphor in there where like just going for like God and like being a perfect moral being like is going to make you miss, and that there needs to be this faith and amorphous and course setting, you know, actually journeying the course in a way that has unnamed objectives or destinations. If you get what I'm getting at.
Self-deluded or illusory, I'm actually dramatically off course without realizing it. That's the original meaning. And so the idea is that human beings are thrown into this universe in which they have the option, because it's an open future, of participating in the creation of the future. But of course, human beings sin in the sense that they are self-deceptive. They go off course. And so what you have is in the Old Testament, you have the creation of the prophetic tradition, prophets. Here's another thing that we've lost the sense of. A prophet is not somebody who tells the future like some sort of psychic. Okay? Prophecy isn't about telling you what's going to be happening 200 or 300 years from now.
It's about helping you get there, like a navigator.
Prophecy means a telling forth. Yeah, the job of the prophet is to wake you up right now to how you are off course.
You're lost. You're lost. Like a notification that you've left your Mac behind, or your AirPods behind. You're off course. Hey, you're off.
So a better analogy isn't the psychic. When you go to the psychic and, oh, you will meet a tall, dark stranger or some crap like that. That's not a good analogy for a prophet. A better prophet is when you and your loved one go into therapy and the therapist says something and it wakes you up to, holy crap, this is how I'm going wrong. This is how I'm off course.
Holy shit. So going to 12-step meetings, going to NA for the very first time, being told very quickly with all the language that recovery brings with it, oh my God, I'm off course in this sense, in this sense, in this sense. And this terminology means, oh my God, and this, maybe kind of silly saying, but to the addict, kind of really just strikes home being off course in this way. And it's almost like all these navigational tools or guardrails or guidelines or navigation map making tools.
This is how I need to get back on track. That's the job of a prophet.
Step work.
You think of yourself as somebody who's on a journey. You're starting here and you're trying to make a better self and you're trying to make the right decisions and you're trying to steer things. You want your life to progress. You want your culture to progress. Try to think about how you would understand yourself, how you would judge yourself, and you couldn't make use of this notion of progress.
It is what it is.
So
cyclical.
What starts to happen is a commitment to more and more trying to cultivate the wisdom of deeply remembering God, which doesn't mean reciting beliefs. It means participating in the ongoing creation of the world, shaping the future, helping yourself, your neighbors, and your society to progress, where that progress is measured mostly in terms of moral improvement, increasing justice, increasing flourishing, increasing sense of people living up to their promise. And this is what I ask you. Do you feel like you're living up to your promise? Is it an important thing for you?
No.
If it is, and I feel
it's important, but falling short is also important. Promise, that's actually kind of cool. They just living up to a promise. That's why I'm titling these Engaging John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, because engagement means some sort of promise, some sort of like contractual promise and living up to a promise in a way. And engagement is I can look it up, but I looked at, I was trying to find the right word, grappling with the meaning, with John Vervaeke's meaning crisis, confronting, facing. I had a few things I was kicking around, but engaging to me seemed the best because it meant some sort of promise on my end to live up to it, to do this thing, in a deep way, in a meaningfully deep way. Engage.
It's probably the case that for many of you it is. That very way of thinking, that's part of the grammar that we have inherited. What Christianity did is it made a really radical claim. It claimed that this kairos was found in a particular person.
Oh, shit.
And what that's going to do is it's going to personalize all of this in a really dramatic way. But before we do that, I want to switch back over to what's happening at a similar time in ancient Greece. And so they start to do things that, again, don't happen before. Lots of cultures were doing arithmetic, but the Greeks invent mathematics. They invent geometry. They start to create abstract symbol systems for their own sake. Now that's what's going on in what's basically being invented in ancient Greece is this capacity for rational argumentation. That's the psychotechnology. Again, you think of this. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not claiming that other groups or people are irrational or they can't be reasonable. I'm not being ethnocentric. But you get the explicit training of rational argumentation as a core psychotechnology in ancient Greece. Now that is going to have very important consequences. Now what's interesting again is how this comes in to ancient Greece. I'm going to introduce you to two individuals who are sort of the epitome of the axial revolution in Greece. Pythagoras and Socrates. You know Pythagoras, of course, because of an important mathematical theorem, the Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah, the Pythagoreans
now, Pythagoras is a very interesting person.
They were nuts. There was a whole religious, cultish, not necessarily, and I don't know if it was a bad, using it in the pejorative sense, but very, Pythagoreans were kind of nuts. So.
Because he seems to be, he belongs to, Cornford makes this argument very well, he belongs to a group of individuals that are around, sort of just coming out of that dark age, around 600 BCE. These individuals were called the divine men. It's pretty clear that these men seem to represent a rediscovery of shamanic psychotechnologies. They have a lot of associations with sort of capacities for healing, for flying through the air. And so a lot of this is legendary, right? It's mythological, it's not literal. But Pythagoras is a real person. Now, of course, there's lots and lots of legendary material around him, but the legend even points towards these important aspects. He seems to have gone through shamanic training. He engaged in something called the Thunderstone ceremony, which involved him isolating himself in a cave, going through some radical transformation, and then coming out of it. He seems to have experienced soul flight because he talked about the capacity for the psyche to be liberated from the body. He was very tall and he dressed like a god, but no one found it offensive for him to do so, at least not the people that followed him. He comes to this realization that this new psychotechnologies of rational reflection and mathematics give us access to abstract patterns that we are not directly aware of. Like we all take it for granted that we know what an octave is and we know that it can be expressed by ratios, but that was his discovery. So what he does is he takes this idea about realizing through music and math these abstract patterns, and then he links them to the project, the shamanic ability to engage in self-transcendence.
Whoa.
He comes up with the idea.
Self-transcendence through math. Yeah, I guess I never thought that is kind of the figure of Pythagoras. It's sort of like a good example of that, those two things coming together. And that's kind of crazy to think about. maybe some extra motivation to learn some freaking math is that there could be the potential for self-transformation through what seems like super boring exercises.
Idea that we're somehow trapped in this world, but we can learn to fly above it. We can fly free, like the shaman. But he's allied it explicitly to the axial project of self-transcendence, of getting in touch with the rationally realized patterns, because that will liberate us. That will change and transform us. Now, Pythagoras gives us a lot of the words that we take for granted. I said earlier that I didn't like calling the pre-axial world a cosmos because Pythagoras actually invents this word, cosmos. He's the first person to describe the universe as a cosmos. Now, many of you probably treat those two terms as synonymous. Universe, the one verse, and cosmos. They're not. Try to think of a word that's actually related to cosmos that you're familiar with.
An element of beauty added to it. And the universe is just sort of a cold, indifferent description, mathematical description. I think cosmos has some sort of notion of aesthetic or spiritual, maybe something to it.
So the word that might not come to mind is the word cosmetic. Cosmetics come from cosmos. What do cosmetics do? They reveal the beauty of things, how beautiful and ordered they are. So Pythagoras has the idea that if we can use music and mathematical thinking and practices that engage in this altered state of consciousness, and he's integrating them all together. It's not quite clear how, but what we can do is we can transcend and see the world as beautiful. And we're going to come back and talk about this, how when people have awakening experiences, they suddenly experience the world as a cosmos, as radically beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now remember Pythagoras, because he's going to have a huge influence on somebody we're going to talk about, Plato. But there's somebody who had an even greater influence on Plato, and somebody who really epitomizes the axial revolution in ancient Greece. In fact, he has a revolution named after him. This is called the Socratic Revolution. And the person we want to talk about is Socrates. I'm going to argue how Socrates epitomizes
Kind of looks like Santa.
The Greek form of the axial revolution. And then what we're going to do is we're going to see how Plato takes Socrates and Pythagoras and puts them together, and how Socratic and...
If I could edit better, I'd put a little Santa hat on him right there. But I can't edit that well.
And then what we're going to do is we're going to see how Plato takes Socrates and Pythagoras and puts them together, and how Socratic and Platonic your cognition is, how it's part of the grammar of how you think. I mean this seriously. Do you actually experience the universe as a cosmos? We'll take a look at that the next time we're together. Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Nice. All right. That was a good one. I apologize if you heard the cats the whole time. It's dangerously 1 minute away from their dinner time, so they were getting a bit chatty. Apologies for that. But this was a good one. Cosmos, Pythagoras, Two Worlds mythology. That was cool. Everyday world, but then progress, narrative form. This was very, very interesting. Thank you for sticking with it. And if you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing, sending to a friend, someone else who's into philosophy, someone else who might have watched John Vervaeke's work before, and may be looking for a different way of engaging with awakening from the meaning crisis. Thank you so much again for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.